It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Welcome to Bench Talk 101. As a lot of you will know, this was created because of COVID, about getting together, meeting up with like-minded people to talk about woodwork and talk about things that we like. And week on week, it's getting busier and busier. It's kind of gone crazy, which is really good because it means that people get a chance to join in and stuff. Over the weeks, we've had different speakers speak about the different topics that they're passionate about. I just wanted to point out that one of them, a speaker 2 weeks ago, which is Richard Hughes, there's so much has been generated from that talk on ancient planes that it's really quite amazing, really. Currently, he's at 869 views on the YouTube, and it was only put up just over a week ago. So he's got a really good following there already. And I do believe if you were looking at the unplugged woodworking, that you've got two people that are already have made aeroplanes already and actually using them, and somebody's shot one 120 foot or 120 meters already, but I'm sure Jim would like to talk more about that later. But anyway, tonight it's all about Nick Gibbs, and we're going to do it slightly different today, where I'm not actually going to introduce Nick. I thought the best way to introduce Nick is one of his competitors, ex-competitors, and get a bit of banter going on straight away. So Derek Jones, an editor, introducing Nick Gibbs, an editor.
You're welcome. Right, good evening, everybody. So tonight we've got Nick Gibbs with us in the house. So I put together a few words just to cue things up for Nick. And I'm going to be working off of my very amateurish auto cue, which is slightly above my screen. So if I'm not looking straight down both barrels, straight in the eye, that's because I'm just sort of hovering just above my screen. So what have I got here? Nick entered the world of publishing as editor of the Woodworker in 1988, but left after 3 years to launch Good Woodworking for a rival publishing company. After 15 years as their editor, as their editorial director, he struck out on his own and launched British Woodworking in 2007, which, not surprisingly, delivered exactly what the title suggests. So a second magazine followed in 2008 called Living Woods, which gave us a hint of Nick's passion for and commitment to a lifestyle that most of us would consider to be, how can I put it, slightly left of centre. Now, Nick and I have been competitors in the past. We'd often meet up at trade junkets to review, the latest piece of kit, hoping for a scoop, but invariably just managed to leave with just the same story. On more than one occasion, I think I pulled into the car park of that well-known tool emporium down in the West Country just as Nick was leaving, so he picked me to the post on more than one occasion. In 2014, while riding his bike, Nick suffered a near-fatal accident, which meant that he was forced to put both of his woodworking titles on the back burner. Now, it's a little-known fact that the number of magazines on the newsstands in the UK in relation to population is one of the largest in the world. It's a really, really tough market to compete in, but thankfully now, corner shops, newsstands, etc. aren't really where the action is. All the interesting stuff is happening on Bench Talk 101 and online generally. So last month, after years of planning, Nick managed to bring to life an idea that first came to light more than 20 years ago, I believe, and launched Quercus Magazine. So tonight, Nick's going to tell us a little bit more about that idea and his life as an editor and what we can expect to see in the issues ahead. So Nick, if you're ready, it's over to you.
I am ready. Can everyone hear me? Is it working? Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, I became a woodworker. I'm a sort of a half woodworker, half journalist. But I started as a woodworker because my parents, and some of you in Quercus may have seen this article about Windsors of Wickham, because my parents bought a tiny, tiny business in High Wycombe, which was not Windsor's. Actually, it was caning and rushing furniture, cane and rushing furniture. And there's a picture here, actually. Can everyone see that? And that is a rushing workshop, and down below is a caning workshop. And it's almost identical to the workshops that my mum and dad bought in the late 60s. And so I would go there and I would be taught by all the the people to use a saw and stuff like that. So it's getting very, very basic woodworking skills. And I was more a sort of person who came up with stupid ideas, and so nothing's changed there, I suppose. And I was convinced I was the first person to make a skateboard, and convinced I was also the first person to do a skateboard, and what was the other one? Snowboard, using plywood and various other things. It's probably not true. Anyway, so I did various things and ended up becoming a journalist, because that's what I wanted to do, was find out a university was what I wanted to do. And I found, while I went to journalism college, all about magazines, and I discovered what I really, really wanted to do was edit magazines and be an editor. And I was really blessed, really, really blessed. One of those few people who fall on their feet and discover that they're doing exactly what they want to do. And so I've been very fortunate there. And after journalism college, which I'm actually qualified in now, I did indeed edit Woodworker magazine, Britain's oldest magazine. And this was my final issue with Richard Williams's Ebony Chairs. And I left, as Derek suggests, to go freelance first. And then a mate of mine who had just joined this company called Future Publishing, which was then a very, very small company in Bath. And a guy called Chris Anderson had started the company, and over a garage with one magazine, and it was a Amstrad magazine. I assume some of you, all of you remember Amstrads? Yeah, sounds like it, or looks like it. And he came up with an idea, and I think it was called Amstrad Action. And it went out on the newsstands. And as Derek suggests, there are a lot of newsstands per person. I mean, a lot of magazines per person. And it failed completely. And then for some reason, or it was failing, didn't make any money. For some reason, they thought, well, why don't they put a cover mount on it? So they put an Amstrad disc sort of thing on the front with, actually it wasn't a disc, they had sort of slot-in legs then, and with some trials games, sort of intros to Amstrad games. And it was so successful that he started up a whole company of mainly video games and computer magazines. And then a friend of mine went to work for Chris as a marketing manager, and Chris came up to him and said, right, what we really want is a woodworking magazine. I don't suppose you'd know anybody. And so my mate Andy said, I've got just the bloke. So I went down to Bath, where they were based, from London, where I was, and launched Woodworking magazine, which hopefully some of you remember. Can you see it? Yeah. And it was the first magazine that I launched, and it was just the most thrilling thing ever to do. And it was just so exciting. We did such really, really stupid things. We did tape measure racing to find out which retracted fastest. We also threw tape measures out of windows just to see which ones would survive. And we just did lots of things. We had in the company, in those days, you didn't do all your own technique. You had what's called a repro house, you did all the scanning of photographs. It was before digital. And there was always a queue, and we were always late. We were always invariably late to go to press, because I would be constantly trying to push yet a bit more into the magazine. But we used to have a Friday thing, which was Friend of Friday, I think we called it. And we would go around the company with a tray with mugs of tea and some donuts. And we'd always go around to thank somebody in the company for what we'd done. But we always ended up in the repro company, the repro department, because we were forever, ever late and begging them to scan in a photo at the last minute. Anyway, so when I was there, a critical thing happened when I was at Woodworking. Well, one, I tried buying it, but wasn't very successful, it didn't work. But B, possibly the most important thing, and I'd say possibly the most important publishing moment of my life was, and some of you may know about this or heard about this, is that one of my publishers, a bloke called Kevin Cox, said to me, I think what we need in this magazine, Nick, is some kind of hoary old craftsman. And hoary is spelled Hoary, I think. Derek will know this. Thumbs up, Derek, if I've got it right. You're good. And so Kevin told me he wanted me to find a hoary old craftsman. And I remembered this chairmaker who I'd come across right at the end of my time at Woodworking Magazine, because we reviewed this new book he published called Welsh Stick Chairs. And for somewhere in the back of my brain, I remembered John and knew that he worked reputedly without any electricity. So I thought I'd go down and see him, and sat there with John having tea and coffee or whatever it was. And there started a quite remarkable friendship. And he sort of became sort of surrogate father to me. And we had terrible arguments and also fantastic, fantastic times. The best of which, when we argued over who was going to be in the top bunk and the bottom bunk when we were staying at his son's house, and well, one of his son's house. I think he actually went on the top for some bizarre reason, but whatever. Anyway, so he eventually had a column in Good Woodworking, which I'd like to say it's in this issue, but it's not. And I haven't got that issue. It's issue 13, if you need to find it. And he got his column. And then about 2 or 3 years later, I stopped editing the magazine. And he sort of, at that point, came to an end. He sort of thought, well, he didn't have enough too. And he sort of was right in that you can only go a certain distance with a column when you run out of steam. And especially if you're talking about the same thing. And he was amazing, he had a remarkable depth, but he did sort of run out of what he was going to say for the next one. And he only sort of returned much later as the anarchist woodworker, when he sort of set himself projects to make. And that rather sort of changed his whole attitude. And then he wrote many, many more articles, but that was beyond my time. Anyway, so this is the last cover that I did, or actually it was the goodbye cover that my team did of me, as you can see. And it's a trick I learned a long time ago in publishing, if any of you ever edit a magazine, is that if you want to improve your editor and their art editor's skills, is you ask them to do a cover as a thank you cover to somebody, and they come up with the best cover lines, the better cover lines they ever do. It's a brilliant exercise. Anyway, there was mine, with lots of on that. Anyway, so I left in 2005, when I did try and buy Good Woodworking again, and was on the cusp of buying Good Woodworking off Future Publishing, and was nipped at the post because I've yet to work out what exactly it was, but suddenly, for some mysterious reason, the publishers of Woodworker nipped in and started outbidding me. And it went up and up and up. And eventually, the people at Future said, no, Nick, don't be stupid. But we had raised the money, raised the price high enough to be quite significant. And I suspect the publishers of Woodworker actually never made any money out of it. They just kept it out of my hands. Anyway, so one of the, a mate of mine who is one of the tool retailers, who I know well, said, well, Nick, I know that traditional woodworking is not doing very well. And why don't you buy it? He thought it was up for sale. So I did buy it for 1 penny. And I was sort of, I hadn't bought it, and I was still uncertain whether to buy it when I went away with my family to Australia, using the money that I was paid off by Future, because they felt guilty enough to give me some money. So we went to Australia, and I wasn't going to buy this magazine, despite it being only a penny, unless I had come up with a title, not traditional. I must get a glass of water. I'm going to call the daughter. Lara, can you give me a glass of water? Sorry, that's a basic skill, a failure on my behalf. Anyway, so I was in the airport in Sydney and was looking around and saw a title magazine, Vogue, but it was called Australian Vogue. And I suddenly thought, well, why don't we call it British Woodworking? And it would give it a completely different angle. Thank you. It would give it a completely different angle, and the whole, that's gin. A completely different angle, and we'd be able to focus on something different. So it wouldn't be, something like, I don't know, like furniture or cabinet making, or furniture and cabinet making, which is a stupid idea, or something, popular or good, or, any number of different magazines that have a name from. So this was my first issue of British Woodworking. That was in 2007, August, September 2007. And the guy who made that blanket chest is still doing very nicely, I think. There he is. Anyway, so that after about a year of doing British woodworking, I decided that I went to Westonbirt a few times. I don't know if any of you went to the Festival of the Tree at Westonbirt. And it was quite earthy and full of quite sort of, what's the word to use? Beardy is what John Brown would call them. And he called the Beardy Weirdies, or the Weirdy Beardies. Oh, Peter Wood's there. Hello, Peter. John would have called you, I'm afraid, Peter, John would have called you a Beardy Weirdy or a Weirdy Beardy, but, you know, he was very friendly. Yeah. Anyway, so I had this thought that there might be a market for a magazine all about green woodworking and stuff like that. So in 2008, I launched Living Woods, which actually, of all the magazines, was my favourite because it was actually the first one which really was my title. Although Mike Abbott argues it was his title because he'd written a book called Living Woods. By this stage, actually, I must go backwards a bit. It was indeed while I was at Good Woodworking magazine with John Brown that we first had this idea of producing a chair making magazine. And to this day, well, he's not here, fortunately, we don't know which of us had the idea at the beginning. But obviously amongst you, it's me. I had the idea, but I can't quite remember. It was, I was a bit bored of publishing because I'd moved from editing Good Woodworking, and I was sort of acting as a troubleshooter in the publishing company. So I was hiring and firing and launching magazines and closing magazines and running conferences and lots of stuff like that in all different subject matters. So I launched a sailing magazine and a cross-stitch magazine, all sorts of magazines, because I so loved magazines that my belief was you didn't really need to know the subject, which is perhaps still true of my woodworking magazines. In fact, the sailing one, I hated sailing, absolutely hated sailing. And I'd never been in a yacht before in my life. And one of the correspondents said, no, Nick, you must go. And we went across an amazing boat called the Jolly Breeze across the channel. And that was and it's the only time I've been on a sailing boat ever since. And it was good though. But anyway, while John and I came up with this plan, which is here. There are a few more pages of this, but this is the most critical one. And actually, what's quite worrying when I now read what his outline was, that actually it's rather better than what we've done in Quercus. So his idea, I'll read them to you. He wanted a chair of the month. He wanted articles by people who use hand tools. We got that right. Recent addition to modern hand tools. Other things, large readers' letters, we can do that. In-depth reviews of existing and new books, and on it goes, hints and tips. But anyway, what is more critical is this, really. By this stage, we decided it was going to be called Quercus. I don't quite remember, and again, I like to think it was me, and he likes to think it was him, who came up with this title. And we were a bit worried, and still am, because there's a Spanish magazine called Quercus that is for a sort of wildlife bird watching magazine in Spanish. So I came up with the conclusion it was worth competing and not worrying too much. And if all else fails, and I haven't got it here, done, is we're going to change the C to a K. In fact, I'm quite tempted to do it anyway, because it's a bit weird having Quercus with a K, and it looks slightly sort of alternative and stupid. And there's something, I'm really quite tempted. So maybe one issue will come out with a K, just to see how many people notice. Anyway, John wrote to me in this here sort of outline. He wrote huge long letters. They go on forever and ever and ever, typed up, all of them typed on his typewriter. And he sent me, unfortunately, I've kept them all. I've got hundreds of letters from John, and one day I'll publish them. And they were just amazing. He'd recommend books, and he was an amazing, amazing person to know. Difficult, very difficult, and could be very, very rude, and sexist, and probably racist, all sorts of ists, but also really inspiring, amazing man. Anyway, he said here Our venture, and this is John and my venture, and this is, did you date this? No, he didn't. I think it's in about 1996. And I only know that because Lara, my waitress, who just been my drink, was just about to be born then, or had been born when we did this. And John became very fond of her, and he sent her a Newcastle United baby grow when she was born. And John at that stage was supporting Newcastle United and was very impressed by Kevin Keegan, but was embarrassed because they only had an away strip left, so it was all blue. Anyway, that's another aside. Our venture would only fail because he was really confident this was going to be a great idea. John was always confident that anything he touched was going to be a great idea. Our venture would only fail if we are half-hearted about it. And if this frightens you, stop now. The magazine will only fail if it isn't good. The market is there, and of that I am certain. It needs lively guys to tap it. I am not, very definitely not, an establishment person, and I suspect neither are you. But you can appear that way. He was terribly rude about me. He was terribly rude about everybody, actually. And anyway, be that may, the rather more prescient paragraph, which is quite remarkable, really, is we live in uncertain times, things constantly changing, and I don't suppose there has ever been a period when it has been more difficult to gauge the public mood. Nothing is certain, and my guess is as good as anybody's. But with the right power and promotion, this fabulous idea we're talking about, this idyll, is perfectly possible. And they said, I'm having terrible trouble with this machine. He'd run out of ink, I think, by that stage. So, sure enough, I was editing British Woodworking and Living Woods, and also a title called Small Woods, which was for owners of small woodlands. And I had just got British Woodworking going monthly because we won the contract of the Guild of Master Craftsmen, I hasten to add, to do the show catalogue for the D&M show. Do any of you been to the D&M show in? You did, Derek. Don't. And in Sandown, and we had won the contract to do the brochure, which meant we paid for the print, but we got all the advertising, and it opened up a big area of advertising because some of the big power tool manufacturers were advertising, and we nicked the advertising manager off Furniture and Cabinet Maker rather neatly, and but we had to go monthly. So in the late 2013, took British Woodworking Monthly. So I was editing British Woodworking Monthly, Living Woods bi-monthly, and Small Woods quarterly, all at the same time, and entirely stress-free. Loved it. I often didn't sleep very much, but it just didn't hassle me in the slightest. I was just the easiest thing in the world. And then, as some of you might know, I got knocked off my bicycle near Cirencester in Gloucestershire when a lady in a Land Rover, sort of Discovery, clipped my elbow just there. And I was put in the cartwheel and fell on the back of my head, just here, and was taken by hospital. Sadly, the air ambulance, the helicopter did land, but you can't take someone with a head injury by helicopter because the pressure changes, and therefore it's too dangerous to take someone in a helicopter. But I was taken in great rush to Swindon, and then from Swindon to Bristol, which has the nearest neurological hospital, in a coma. I was put in an induced coma. The world was quiet for a while, and my children were rushed to the hospital, and I was in a coma for 10 days, and came round utterly mad, even madder than before. And I had this idea, I'm told that I had lots and lots of hallucinations afterwards. And one of the early ones was, and the funny thing is the dreams you have after being in a coma, and they weren't necessarily dreams that I had when I was in the coma. Afterwards, I've never had dreams as clear and memorable as the ones then. And one first hallucination was when I was in a ward of my own, and I told everyone that I was in a hotel. But this one was, I was absolutely convinced that I was handing out awards at a woodworking show, and that I had been given my own bedroom as a bit of a suite, as a sort of privilege. And as I walked along the corridor between all these little cubicles, all the names, for some bizarre reason, were the names of famous woodturners. And there was one called, I can't remember anyway, but they were all famous people. It's quite bizarre. Anyway, so I stayed in hospital for a few weeks, and then went to a rehabilitation centre in Bristol, near Bristol, where Richard Hammond also went, not at the same time, I hasten to add. And he spent there, hated it, absolutely detested it, and tried escaping there. Because I tried escaping quite a lot, I've forgotten this. I tried escaping from intensive care enough times that they put me on what's called a deprivation of liberty order, which means that the hospital, it's not quite sanctioning. It is, it looks like someone's drinking down there. It must be time. Surely don't we do a toast every so often? Isn't that what you do? Indeed, not anyway, whatever. Anyway, so I was, where were we? This is one of the problems, unfortunately, with a brain that's slightly damaged, is that I do just wander off. Where were we? You can't remember. No, none of you can speak. That's difficult. I do WI talks, which Peter Wood actually is down there, recommended I did. And I do WI talks, and I say to the women when I give a talk is that will come a moment that my mind will just wander off, and I'll, in a sort of Robbie, what's he called? Corbett. God, things just get. Ronnie Corbett. I used to wander off little stories, and the story would just wander off. And the trouble is, I have no chance of getting back now. The chance I'd wander off and not know where I started. So I'd have to ask one of the ladies in the WI where I'd gone. Actually, it has to be that I usually did, but I sort of hammed it up a bit because they loved it. They love the whole involved of crowd, or sort of crowd audience participation. And I'm going to try desperately to work out. So, Geoffrey, you could unmute yourself. Can you imagine where I was?
Nick, you were talking about escaping from the hospital.
Yeah. Going on deprivation of liberty order.
That's right.
Yeah. So I was put on that because I tried escaping a number of times, and at one stage, the consultant in the intensive care was walking beside me, trying to stop me get to the security exit and get through the exit. And he was sort of right next door to me, and he saw this maintenance man coming the other way, holding a hammer. And the consultant was really saying, afterwards he told me, he was really quite worried that I was about to steal a hammer and try and knock my way through out of the security guard. And the security guards knew me so well from having done this so often that I went back there a month later, and they happened to be the same ones were on. And I said, you must have millions of patients. You can't remember them all. They said, yeah, we remember you. And because I had tried getting out a few times. And I'm so nearly got out. I was within 10 yards of the main exit out of Southmead Hospital. Have any of you been to Southmead Hospital in Bristol? Yeah, well done. Yeah. Well, it's the new version, which is a huge atrium. It's got a vast atrium. And you really think you're doing well. You almost feel you're outside. And within 10 yards, one of the burliest security guards rugby tackled me and stopped me, which I was desperately embarrassed by because he must be 60 and I was whatever less. And I used to be a rugby player and couldn't quite get around the idea that I hadn't been able to skim around the outside or dummy him or whatever it is that they call it in rugby. Anyway, oh God, Geoffrey, come on, where was I? Why was I there?
Okay. Where you got to?
No. I'll quickly go. Sorry, I'm sure it's right. Anyway, so I did get one issue of British Woodworking out specifically to fulfil the job that we wanted to do for D&M Tools. And so we got the brochure out, miraculous. I have no idea how I did it, but then and got one issue of British Woodworking out, and then closed British Woodworking because I knew I couldn't do a monthly magazine. And then later on, in 2015, about a year later, I decided to try to get Living Woods going. I did 3 issues. But after the first issue, I realized that I hadn't paid the print bill, and actually I'd taken all the money out of British Woodworking, so we couldn't pay the printers. So I did the mad thing of going on crowdfunding to pay for the print, for the previous magazine. And I hope none of you donated money to that crowdfunding, because I'm sure we didn't pay it back. Well, I know we didn't pay it back, but we raised £9,000 in about 4 or 5 days, which we then used to publish 3 copies of Living Woods, issues of Living Woods, and that was it. I was exhausted. I could do the first issue okay, because there were no readers, there were no one to liaise with, and but the second and third ones I just couldn't get out. So I knew my publishing days were done. So ever since then, I've done some really mad things to try and stay in mankind. I have been, I was a kitchen porter for a while at Cote Brasserie, which I loved. I loved washing up. I was a Deliveroo rider for a bit. And I was a sort of groundsman in a country park for a while. And as it ended, that job, in the autumn, and we were on sort of like a seasonal work, and I was going back for a last day on my bicycle, because I couldn't drive then, because I had epilepsy as one of the consequences of having a damaged brain. I was riding back from to work, and I had a pair of Fiskars pruners. They're the orange ones, they've got orange handles on them. And orange in the tree world is, I think, associated with still. So orange is like the professional colour. And I had these pruners sticking out of my basket and on the front of my bicycle. And this truck comes up beside me and slows down, quite dodgy looking truck. And it puts the window down. And the guy in the truck says, so I think he's about to ask me where to go. And I sort of thought, it's quite a dangerous corner. I thought, what on earth is going on? He puts his window and said, do you want a job? And I said, what? He said, do you want a job? And I said, well, okay. And he stopped in the lay-by and he went in and he said, do you want a job as an assistant wood tree chipper, chipping wood? He was a sort of tree surgeon, but not quite a serious tree surgeon. It was a father and son team, who it turned out, but I'm naive really, turned out, and I've nothing against, and I'm trying to do it very politely, were travellers, and they came from a travellers camp quite near Cirencester. And so I spent about 2 months with them. It was fascinating watching them and being with them. And they were quite elusive and secretive, it has to be admitted. And yeah, they were very secretive. And it came to, and they gave me cash. They were very loyal about it. They were very good at paying, and they were quite entertaining, but they wouldn't say anything about anything. And it came to a point where we were doing a job in Chepstow. And afterwards, at the end of the day, one of them said, do you know where we've been? And I said, yes. And he said, where have we been? I said, we've been to Chepstow. And he said, why? And I said, well, we've just been over the Severn Bridge and also just past Chepstow Rugby Club. And he honestly thought that they were in a bubble of some sort, that somehow away from the rest of the world. And the next day they asked me to start early. And when I arrived at the truck and got into the truck, and it was very early, and I said, well, where are we going? And they said, oh, you can't know that, you shouldn't know that. And I said, what? And they said, no, we're not allowed to ask any questions. And I sort of got a bit shirty about this. And the son, funnily enough, got a bit shirty because he and I have been getting on quite well. And the father said, no, you've done this. And he chucked me out of the truck with my electric chainsaw and not my boots, though. I had to get them back later. And they were perfectly charming. I was a bit frightened, I have to admit, that I might be followed. But I had to walk home. And after that, I think that was the last not so serious job that I did. I failed in getting a job for Waitrose because I was seen to be too independent. And I failed to get a job as a parking attendant, not a parking attendant, you know, a traffic warden. They're called community officers these days, because I couldn't remember enough number plates. And they kept coming up with number plates and I couldn't remember enough of them. Anyway, then I thought it's time to stop and to actually try and do something serious. And when Chris Schwartz of Lost Elk Press asked me to do the preface to, I think it's the Welsh Dick Chairs, not for Good Work, or one of them. And actually, maybe it was Good Work. And I started finding all the letters that John Brown had sent me. And in amongst, I found this thing about Quercus. And I thought, well, you know, bugger me, I'm going to bloody well do this. And so I started working a way to how to launch it. And this was sort of August last year. And I started coming up with names and covers and also, by the way, as an aside, I've just remembered Bill Carter, when this is one of the things I was trying to remember, was when I was in rehabilitation centre outside Bristol, my mum or dad brought me this package, and in it was this really beautiful mitre plane, which Bill was sent me, and has, I'm not sure you'll be able to see it, but right there somewhere, you might be able to see it, just there, it's stamped Nick Gibbs. I'm very, very proud of this, Bill, and very, very grateful, because it gave me a lot of sense of worth and that there was a lot of people out there supporting me, and I knew there were. And there you go. Come on, Geoffrey, where was I? Oh, okay, I was coming up with the idea of launching Quercus, there we go. And we had come up with a name and the logo. And then I was at a, what's it called, Extinction Rebellion march, wasn't march, it was a cycle ride actually, ironically. And there were all these people chanting with placards and all this sort of stuff. And I sort of was thinking to myself, there must be a little bit more I can do to the world than a hand tool magazine. And I thought, well, maybe I could publish a magazine about sustainability and all that sort of stuff. And I had already published a part magazine called Barefoot. So I thought, well, that's a good idea, I'll do that. And I tried, it was just too complicated. So then in about January this year, I thought, no, I'll give sort of, and no, I didn't. What happened was, in January of this year, I have to admit, and I'm going to be completely open about this, is the compensation case came to a conclusion. And so my need to be a delivery rider somewhat diminished. Now, I'm not massively rich as a result, but I'm safe, let's put it that way. And so I don't have to be a delivery rider anymore. And one of the neuropsychologists I once saw, of the many, said, look, Nick, don't do menial jobs, because although they're really important, they're really, really important for me during my recovery, not because the beer money, but more just for self-respect, and that you were doing something and trying something and having a go. And it was, I always tell my children, there isn't such a thing as you know, every job is a proper job. It is a job, and you should put your heart and soul into every job. Anyway, oh yes, so I came up with the conclusion that being in Oxford, what I would do is I would just read. I have never just sat around just reading since I was even before university, probably at kindergarten. And so I sort of set out to read loads and loads of books. And I read all of Steinbeck's books. I read loads and loads of books, mainly because I had a card to go into the very, very beautiful libraries that are in Oxford, where all these very beautiful young students, and it's just such an inspiring place to be. And then, of course, come March, lockdown hits us, and all these fantastic libraries in Oxford close, and there's nowhere for me to go, and no nice young students to ogle at. So I thought, well, there must be something I can do with my time alone, and I thought, well, maybe I should try and give Quercus a go. And so this is in April, and I was pretty casual about it, to be honest, until about the end of April. I was doing lots of bicycle rides, having fantastic fun, and then doing a few hours a day working on the content and the typography and all the design of Quercus, but only spending a few days, hours a day. and thought, well, we should do a flyer. We'll do a flyer for as a promo. And then I said, no, bugger that. It's no point doing a flyer. You might as well do it all. And that was only about the beginning of May. And so then I thought, no, let's give this a go. And then by the end of May, by the middle to end of May, we had the first issue of Quercus at the press and printed, with the kilted woodworker on the cover, S.N. Simcox, who is one of many, many remarkable people who I've met off Instagram, who are becoming friends. And I think actually that was one of the reasons why I started Quercus last summer, was because I realized that I missed all my woodworking friends, all the people like all of you, you know, on this gallery of people. And probably, you know, I'm sort of half guessing that quite a lot of you I at some time have communicated with, or had an email with, or a tip or a question or something, or an argument or whatever, or have, you know, a complaint about an advert or something. And I really missed that. I realized that the vast majority of friends I had in the world were woodworkers, and not because they were immensely close friends, but acquaintances. And I really missed that. And it was the most important part of my life had just been taken away from me. And the shows, I used to love the shows, and not necessarily because you sold very much, but just because of the fun, really. And for selling helicopters. Do any of you remember my helicopters that I sold at shows? One second, I can get one of those. Hold the line. There you go. I used to sell helicopters at shows to try and promote my magazines. Yeah, Derek bought one and made one later. That's another thing I did after my injury. I became what's called the peddling peddler. And I don't know if any of you know, but you get something called a peddler's certificate. And it means that you can go anywhere, in any marketplace, anywhere in the country, and you can peddle, you can sell your wares, but you have to be able to make your wares there and then where you are sitting, and you have no transport to get you there. So I had a bicycle with a vice attached to the handlebars, and I had a little spoke shave, a brilliant little spoke shave. I think it was one of James Mersell's spoke shaves, and I would sort of do this to the blade with a spoke shave and then spin them. And I did the first one. I sold loads at shows in previous times. The first time I did it as the peddling peddler was in Bath, and I went in the centre of Bath, and I had loads of them ready to sell. And I went up, and a guy comes up and he says, "Oh, that's brilliant! I'll have one." And I think, well, this is money for old rope. And I didn't sell a single more, not a single one for the rest of the day. And then I decided to do it in Oxford at Christmas a few years ago. And I got into a train to take my bicycle from Bristol, Swindon to Oxford. And I was talking to a lovely lady opposite me about something. And she was saying, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm selling these helicopters in Oxford." And she was saying, "Oh, I'm going to Christmas to my grandchildren. Can I have 5 of your helicopters?" So I sold 5 on the way to Oxford. And again, I thought, "Oh, God, this is going to be so simple." And I sold 1, just a single one afterwards in Oxford. Because what I've learned is you don't sell stocking fillers in front of children, or you don't buy stocking fillers in front of your children, because it rather gives away some of the most important facts of life. Or one of the most important facts of life. Anyway, so there we are. So there is Quercus. And I'm sure I'm supposed to be saying what is in Quercus, but actually I'm not sure I know. It is quite clearly for people who are passionate about hand tools and working wood by hand of all sorts. So I hope we'll be able to spread it. I think sort of based on John and my philosophy in the beginning, chair making sort of is the pivotal point, as is the spoke shave and the block plane. I sort of consider those two, probably the spoke shave, but also the block plane, as the two sort of the real hinge that is at the middle of Quercus. And then on either side goes sort of country furniture on one side and slide on the other, and then you gradually move towards fine furniture and cabinet making, and really collectors item, planes like Bill's. His get used, obviously. Bill, yours aren't collectors items, yours get used, and at the other end is spoon carving. So we sort of quite a wide spread, and that is the idea. And initially I had this way that John sold his chairs on the idea that they were never commissioned. He'd only ever make one and take it down to the gallery in Newport, and they had the opportunity to buy it, but he was never take a commission because he hated having to produce something that somebody had paid for already. And it's a perfectly good strategy. And I'm sure there are woodworkers, professional woodworkers everywhere who would wish they could make speculative furniture and not commissioned furniture. And I think that was sort of my attitude to the magazine is, look, here it is, you like it, you buy it. And if you buy one, you can buy one in advance, but if you don't like that, you don't have to buy the next one. Whereas subscriptions are a bit frightening because what happens if you give up? And in my case, there is still a reasonable chance that I won't quite be it, for the same reason that the WI ladies have to pick me up or whatever. Actually, some of the WI ladies did have to pick me up because I was halfway through, actually almost the whole way through one of my WI talks, and I was just coming to the punchline about, I can't remember, I had a really good punchline. I was getting near it, and suddenly I drifted off and went towards the door and just went whack, and I think I was talking about epilepsy and had an epileptic fit there and then. And I promise you to this day, I didn't put it on. It was not fate.
Wow,
and
Nick, that's fantastic.
Have we had enough? You saying you've had enough? Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is that it's normally half an hour, and you've done.
Oh, is it? Okay,
you've done sort of 50 minutes at the moment.
But, well, there you are. Sorry.
But what I want to
50,
do, what I want to do, Nick, is allow people to ask you questions. Nick, that was absolutely fantastic. And I think, my memories of you stem right back from the early days of the British Woodworking Magazine. When I was a teacher and you came to my school and you offered a competition all about plane making. And so our students made planes and it was a competition. That's right. Yeah. So really great stuff. So what normally happens at this point, Nick, is that I ask people to put their names in the chat box, and then I read the names out, and then they unmute themselves, and then they ask you a question. So what I'll quickly do at the moment is I just need to change how I've set it up to allow participants to unmute themselves, and we've got questions coming in. So Derek did the intro. Now he's got the first question as well. So Derek.
Yeah, Nick, not a question. Obviously, you've told me everything we needed to know about that. But it's just to say that I had a conversation with Chris and Megan last summer. They told me about Quercus Magazine, that you've been talking to them about a magazine. And we were sitting down and we were doing what woodworkers do when they're not woodworking. And I said, you know what, when the dust settles, by then I just left F&C after 10 years as their editor. And I was feeling pretty raw about the whole magazine sort of publishing industry. And I said, you know what, if anyone deserves to succeed in this business with all these magazines around, it's Nick. And you and I we've been competitors in the past, and I genuinely felt that and meant that at the time and still mean it today. And I've resisted the temptation to write for any magazine since I left, and there have been offers, and I've said, no, I'm done with that. I'm sort of writing about it. I just want to get on and make it. But when you, out of nowhere, dropped me a line and said, hey, that would be really good for Quercus Magazine, I thought, do you know what, it would. I could work with Nick, and I just knew that you were someone that I could work with, and I was so pleased and honoured, I suppose, to be in your first issue. So I wish you all the best with the magazine. I really do. If anyone deserves to succeed in this business, it's you, mate. Okay, that's it.
Very much. Thank you very much.
I think that deserves a toast to Nick.
Yeah, to the
toast to Nick. Yes, yeah. I'm empty, but I'll do that for you.
So next question's coming from Shrenik.
Hello, Shrenik.
Hi, Nick. Thank you. Thank you very much for a brilliant talk there. Interesting to learn your story and how you've got to the Quercus Magazine. I think I was chatting to Jim maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and I asked him, are there any good woodworking magazines which are made in England? And the simple answer was no. And it's great to hear that there's something great coming up. And I think I'm of an age where I've just gotten into woodworking over the last few years, not really subscribed to any magazines, and by the time I'd even thought of it, none existed. But obviously I can try and find old copies of magazines and so on that exist, which are decent magazines. But my question to you is, which is the favorite issue that you've edited?
What, other than the first issue of Quercus, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Gosh, does it have to be a first issue or any issue?
It can be any issue, just an issue that you feel that was, and the reasons behind it.
I'd have to say the first issue of Good Woodworking was just such unbelievable fun, and the team were phenomenal, and it was just we just hit it absolutely. It was just mad, and we worked so hard. And Derek will know, when you work hard on a magazine, it is. And to do a launch, my first launch, and I've done many since then, was just absolutely the funnest time I've had in the world. I mean, the other ones have been great. The ones were my own magazines, but it's difficult to be doing it on a team. Having a team is just, and getting a good team is phenomenal. So that was it.
Good. Thank you for that, Nick. So we've got Chester, who's up for next. Chester is all the way over from America, Nick.
Okay. Where do I kind of see him?
Yeah, I think when I speak, can you see me?
Oh, yeah, I can, yeah. Chet rather than Chester. That's the
Chet is the nickname for Chester, so
okay.
I'm fine with either one of them. But
okay.
First, let me say that was, if you'll pardon the Spanish, simpatico. It was really endearing, me to you in a way. But the thing that you didn't really touch on that I wonder about, I have a friend who publishes a magazine called Kemet Magazine, which is an Egyptological. It's called Kemet, KMT, and it's an Egyptological magazine. And I've done layouts for magazines for art pieces for film. And I know that it takes quite a bit to do the layout, the writing, the editing, the publishing, the subscriptions, and all of that. So when you talk about, I thought I'd go ahead and start a magazine. To me, it's inconceivable that somebody can just do that completely. And so what I wonder is, do you have a team of friends or people that you work with that you can turn around and say, have them working on the layout while you're working on the writing, or a team of people writing? Or are you doing the whole thing like my friend who does Kemet?
Whole thing, everything. Actually, it's in some ways easier than that. It is a bit uninspiring sometimes. You're not quite as, compared with this, you're not as excited. And it can be a bit, not lonely quite, but you just sort of lose motivation. But no, everything. And in some ways it's easier that way. But I've gone out of my way with Quercus to make it as simple as possible. So there are no adverts, because you just make it as fun and easy as possible. So I have no advertisers to deal with. And it's just made it really simple. And the layout is very, very simple. And partly to make it easy to use on digital, which is surely going to be the way forward, but also just to make it terribly simple to produce. And I know, I've worked on InDesign, Adobe InDesign and things like that for so many years that it just is instinct. The only difficult thing is I lost all my ideas of what shortcuts were. My fingers. So sometimes if I get myself into a zone, my fingers go to the right places. But if I then actually ask myself that's the only problem. Otherwise, I find it really simple, I'm afraid.
Right. Well, I've collected over the years, because I'm so old, that I have every fine woodworking magazine from the very first. And I've watched them progress and change. And some friends of mine have written articles in them. So I know that Taunton Press, they have a lot of contributors. but I'm astounded. And I thought about, I saw an advert for Quercus on Facebook, and I thought, well, I should order that. But then I realized that it was an English magazine, and that I didn't know if I could even order it and have it shipped to the States. But I definitely would like to get a copy of it. But I have to commend you on it. I think that's an astounding thing and a great thing. And I really appreciate your speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You can buy it and get it sent to the States, obviously at great cost, unfortunately. Actually, it's not that, anyway, whatever. But we are sort of talking to a publisher of possibly having it perhaps even printed in the States to bring down the costs much lower. We will see. Only time will tell. That sort of, and I say we royally, by the way. You get into the habit all the time, and so it may be in the States more easily, but you can buy it. You can buy it if you go onto mymagazinesub.co.uk/Quercus, and there you'll get it.
Great. Thank you again.
When I do the YouTube video, I'll put the link in the YouTube video so that you can go straight to the subscription to buy it.
Yeah, thanks.
But we're waiting for more people to put their names in the questions, and while I'm waiting there, I'm actually going to unmute Chester again, because this is the time where I'm going to bully somebody, and I'm going to bully Chester, and I'm going to ask Chester. I'm going to say, Chester, would you mind giving us a workshop tour of your fabulous collection and workshop in next week's Bench Talk?
I'd be more than glad to. I'll have to have somebody operating camera because we'll have to walk around as we do it. But if you're okay with that, I'll be more than glad to do that.
Well, we've all been watching over the weeks the backgrounds of your where you've been sat, and every time you're in a different part of your workshop, and you can see the different things that you've got there, and you've amassed an amazing collection there, which would be great to see and to share.
If you don't mind, as well as I don't mind sharing all that, but if you don't mind, if it would be okay, I would like to give a little background of, and I think it would be nice if maybe we had different people doing this, but I would love to hear how people got involved in woodworking. I started when I was only 6 doing boats and things, but it would be interesting to find out how different people came to woodworking and at what age, because I find it fascinating when I find children doing it, as well as I like to see more women and or girls, or however you want to put that, but it's nice to see them getting more involved today than say 50 years ago. So I like,
Well, we look forward to your Bench Talk next week, where you can talk about yourself and your workshop. Thank you very much, Chester. So back on to next time tonight.
I see that it's exactly 9:30.
Which
is exactly when we're supposed to end.
That's
so
right.
I'd have to say, although I probably spoke more than I was supposed to, I'd say I'd hit the deadline perfectly, and we can now all go to bed.
You can, or you could answer one more question from Jim Hendricks.
Okay, go on then.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good. I was really thrilled when I heard the news that you'd recovered, because it was a really bad accident. I remember it very well when it happened, and I think most of the community that knew you was shocked, and I'm astounded that you've come back to your normal self, which is perfect. The content of the magazine is absolutely spot on. It's a cross section of loads of things that are way out. From Richard's Titanic handrail to spoons in the middle of a forest. Bill and the ubiquitous Bill and his plane. And I sat in the sunshine and read it. Thank you. What are your plans for? You talked about. Sorry, the name escapes me. Was it John that did the articles within one of your magazines?
Yeah, John.
Yeah, John. you mentioned that he started out and the enthusiasm was there and there and there, and then the content runs out. And with every media source, it's content driven. It's so what are your plans? Do you have a roadmap as a cyclist? Do you have a roadmap of where you're going, or do you just set off into the woods and carry on?
No, I don't. I mean, as I was saying, the spoke shave and you sort of have a central path of who you want it to aim for. But I know it's sort of evolutionary to just let it meander, really. I mean, I've got a fairly clear idea of various things that actually, I remember now that I wanted to make sure there are no projects, or pretty much no projects, because doing measurements was such a bore that I decided, okay, I don't want to do projects, I mean, some projects that have some ideas, but not ones that go into the detail of the joints necessarily, and that it's 2 foot or whatever in millimeters or whatever, because that is so boring in magazines and such a small number of people you follow them. And also, I don't want to do tests, actually. I want to do, what I want to do is actually what I've sort of done in the past, is to send out emails and say, okay, to lots of people, thousands of people, like a survey, and say, which is your favorite, and it will actually quite soon, which is your favorite spoke shave. And so we get it from people rather than from us experts, looking at lots of spoke shaves and trying to come up for spurious reasons why one is better than the other, which is a very difficult and time-consuming thing and dangerous thing to do by way of money, I suppose. And so I want to make it as simple as possible, Jim, so that it's as much fun as possible. And I get as much words. I want lots of words. I do want to get women. We're trying really hard, actually. That is one really important thing, is to get more female woodworkers. And actually, the second issue, I hope, and certainly the third, we're already getting quite strong contributors who hopefully will be able to push that in that direction, which is really important. And the other thing, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Jim, but a number of people might have noticed how sort of flimsy Quercus is, or lightweight. That's a nice way of putting it. And that was entirely on purpose, because I didn't want to waste money, because the paper is quite cheap if you do it this way. It's much less expensive to post. It's good for the environment because it's thin paper. But also I wanted it to become sort of dog-eared. I wanted a copy of the magazine to feel like it had been through life, and it had been rolled up and put in a jacket pocket, and every word has been read in that magazine. Whereas a lot of woodworking magazines, and ones I've edited myself, I'm pretty certain a lot of people don't read the whole of the magazine. Whereas if I can get people to read Quercus the whole way through, then that will have been a great achievement. I'll be very satisfied. And you can send in your coffee-stained Quercuses and complain about the dog-eared edges if you want, but I'm afraid that's tough.
But Nick, that's what we love about it. And thank you very, very much for giving tonight's bench talk. Everybody, I'd like you to all raise a glass and toast not just the bench, but to Nick. Nick Gibbs, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It's a high-tech conversation.
And a low-tech topic.
Live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.